Calyx reads. Bite-sized book talks, big ideas, and stories worth sharing. Let's read. Books Sparkles. What you're about to hear isn't a legend or a piece of folklore. It's a personal account from a college field research project in Leyte that never fully made sense, even to the person who lived it. This story comes from a woman named Gretchen. Let's go. Dear Calyx reads. I'm Gretchen. This happened when I was in college, during a research project in Leyte. I've never written it like this before, start to finish, because saying it all at once makes it sound unreal. But I'm not telling it to convince you of anything. I'm telling it because some experiences don't age the way they're supposed to. They just sit there, unchanged, waiting for you to look at them again. When people hear field research, they imagine something adventurous but controlled, clipboards, datasheets, maybe a few leeches if you're unlucky. That's what I thought too. Our project was about mangroves. Biodiversity, sediment composition, coastal protection. Nothing mystical, nothing dramatic. Mangroves are supposed to be safe in that quiet, academic way. Studied, measured, understood. We were wrong. There were 6 of us in the group, all environmental science majors. This wasn't a solo thing. That's important. I didn't wander off alone because I was careless or curious or reckless. We followed protocol. We planned routes. We assigned partners. We marked entry points. We did everything right. The mangrove site was along the coast of Leyte, not far from a small community. The locals didn't say much when they saw us unloading equipment. They just watched, not suspicious, more like patient. Like they'd seen this before and already knew how it ended. I noticed that later. At the time, I was too busy adjusting my pack and reminding myself to take good notes. I was the note taker. That was my role. I wrote things down so we wouldn't forget them later. Ironic, I know. The mangroves themselves were dense, more tangled than I expected. Their roots rose out of the mud like interlocked fingers, sharp and knotted, forcing you to step carefully or risk slicing your leg open. The air was thick with humidity and salt. Everything smelled wet, even things that weren't. Once we stepped inside, the outside world disappeared faster than it should have. Sound changed first. Waves became muffled. Wind vanished. Even our footsteps sounded wrong, too soft, like the ground was absorbing them. We split into pairs but stayed close. I was with Jonah, who was cautious to a fault. He checked his compass constantly, even though the GPS app on his phone was still working at that point. Everything looks the same, he said, half joking. I laughed and told him that was the point of mangroves. That was before I realized how literal that statement could become. About an hour in, things started to feel off. Not scary, just slightly misaligned, like the space between trees felt longer than it should have, or shorter. Distances stopped making intuitive sense. My watch fogged over completely, and when I wiped it clean, the time hadn't changed. That's when Jonah noticed the map wasn't matching our position. We should be closer to the water, he said. I looked around. I couldn't tell which direction the water was anymore. We decided to turn back. The marker tape we'd tied to a branch at the start was gone. That shouldn't have happened. The tide hadn't risen enough to reach it. No one else should have been near our entry point. But it was gone, cleanly gone, like it had never been there. Jonah called out to the others. No response. I tried next, louder. My voice didn't carry. That's when I saw someone standing ahead of us, between the roots. At first, I felt relief. Another person meant orientation, context, a way out. She was standing on a narrow patch of solid ground, wearing light-colored clothes that didn't make sense for the terrain. No boots, no mud, no gear, just standing there. I waved. She didn't wave back. She tilted her head slightly, like she was listening to something behind me. I stepped closer. Jonah said my name, but it sounded far away, stretched thin, like audio played at the wrong speed. I didn't turn around. Hi, I said, sorry. Do you know the way back to the trail? She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. You're early, she said. Her voice was calm, normal. That made it worse. We're doing research, I explained. We'll be out soon. She smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just enough to register as a smile. You always say that. I noticed then that she was barefoot. Not carefully barefoot, comfortably so. Like the mud wasn't something she had to think about. I asked her name. She paused, then said, "It depends." That should have been the moment I walked away. Instead, I felt anchored. Not frozen, committed. Like leaving mid-conversation would have been rude in a way I couldn't justify. I asked if she lived nearby. She nodded. "Longer than you." The air felt heavier. My thoughts slowed, like they were pushing through water. I realized I couldn't hear Jonah at all anymore. No breathing, no shifting, nothing. I turned. He wasn't there. The space behind me was wrong. The path we'd come from no longer existed in any recognizable form. Roots crowded together where open ground had been seconds earlier. When I turned back, she was closer. "You wandered," she said gently. "That happens here." "I need to get back," I replied. "You already did." After that, time stopped behaving. I remember walking. I remember not questioning why I was walking. I remember the sensation of being guided, not physically, but internally, like my sense of direction had been temporarily outsourced. The mangroves changed around us. Light shifted color. The ground alternated between solid and liquid. At some point, I realized my boots were gone. I don't remember taking them off. I wasn't afraid. That's the part that scares me the most now. She talked while we moved. Not constantly, just enough to keep me present. "You write things down," she said. "Yes," I answered. "You won't remember this properly." "I remember everything," I said, and meant it. She smiled again. "According to my group mates, this is when I disappeared. They searched for me for 3 hours. They said it was like I'd been deleted from the space. No sounds, no tracks, no signs I'd ever been there at all. They found my notebook near our starting point, placed neatly on a route. My handwriting stopped mid-sentence. No mud, no water damage, just stopped. I remember standing in a clearing that shouldn't exist. The trees formed a circle. The roots arched inward, like ribs. The air felt dense, like it had been holding its breath for a long time. She faced me fully. "You can stay," she said. I considered it. "That alone should tell you something." "I have people waiting," I said, but it felt like a memory I was repeating, not a reason I believed. "They always do." I felt wrong then, like my body wasn't synced correctly. My hands didn't feel like mine. My thoughts lagged. I asked her what she wanted. "To be remembered correctly," she said. "That's where my memory fractures. Not into darkness, into blankness." When I came back, I was standing at the edge of the mangroves, near the access road. My boots were in my hands. My feet were clean. My group mates said I looked calm. Too calm. 3 hours were gone. I couldn't explain where I'd been. And no one, including me, fully believed what I said happened. After that day, things were supposed to return to normal. That's what everyone expected. That's what I expected. Missing time happens, people said. Shock does strange things to memory. Stress fills in gaps with nonsense. There were reasonable explanations available, and everyone was eager to use them. Everyone except me. Because even though I couldn't explain where I'd been for those 3 hours, I knew, very clearly, that I hadn't simply wandered, panicked, or passed out. Whatever happened felt structured, intentional, like I'd stepped briefly into something that already knew its role in the story. I didn't say that out loud. I smiled when people laughed it off. I nodded when Jonah apologized for losing track of me, even though we both knew that wasn't true. I agreed when someone suggested heat exhaustion, dehydration, stress. I let the story become smaller than it was. That night, back at our lodging, I finally sat down to rewrite my field notes. I wanted to make sense of them, to restore order to something that felt scattered. That's when I realized I couldn't remember writing the last page. The handwriting was mine, but it didn't feel like it belonged to me. The sentences were shorter than usual, clipped, almost careful. The final line stopped mid-word, as if whoever was writing had been interrupted, or decided to stop. I stared at that page for a long time, waiting for recognition to kick in. It didn't. Sleep didn't come easily after that. When it did, I dreamed of the mangroves, not as they were, but as they felt. dense, close, listening. I'd wake up convinced I could smell salt and rust in the room, only for it to fade as I became fully conscious. Over the next few days, small things began to change. I'd lose track of time without meaning to. Conversations would skip ahead, like someone had cut out a few seconds and stitched the rest back together poorly. I'd find myself standing somewhere with no memory of walking there. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming enough to demand attention. Just enough to notice. I tried to talk about it once, carefully, choosing my words the way you do when you don't want to sound unstable. I told a friend that something about that day still didn't sit right with me. She laughed gently and said, "Well, at least you came back." That was the first time it occurred to me that coming back might not have been guaranteed. A week later, while reviewing our data, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The timestamps on my notes didn't align with the official timeline. According to my records, I'd been actively writing during the window when my group mates said I was missing. Not continuously, but intermittently, in short bursts. Observations, measurements, comments about light, water depth, tree density. None of it made sense geographically. The locations didn't correspond to any mapped area of the mangroves we'd visited. It was like data from somewhere adjacent to reality. When I brought this up, our professor frowned but dismissed it as a logging error. "Field conditions can do that," she said. "Equipment glitches. Human error." She didn't look me in the eye when she said it. I returned to the mangroves once after that. Not for research, just to see. I didn't go far, just to the edge. I told myself I wanted closure, but that wasn't true. I wanted confirmation, one way or another, that the place hadn't noticed me in return. The trees looked the same. The roots tangled, familiar. The air heavy but ordinary. For a moment, I felt foolish. Embarrassed. Ready to chalk the whole thing up to stress and imagination. Then I saw the ground. Bare footprints, pressed lightly into the mud, facing outward, as if someone had been standing there watching the path. They were my size. I didn't go any further. Years have passed since then. I finished college. I moved away. I built a life that looks stable from the outside. I don't work in mangroves anymore. I still do environmental research, but I choose places with clearer boundaries. Still, every once in a while, something small brings that day back with unsettling clarity. The smell of rust after rain. The feeling of being slightly out of sync with myself. The sense that I've forgotten something important, not lost, just set down somewhere I can't reach. I don't think what I met in Leyte was evil. I don't think it was benevolent either. It didn't threaten me. It didn't harm me. It noticed me. And I think that's what unsettles me the most. I've spent a long time trying to understand what it meant when she said she wanted to be remembered correctly. At first, I thought she meant history, stories erased, places overridden, ecosystems studied but not listened to. Mangroves cleared, rebuilt, measured, renamed. But now I think it was simpler than that. I think she meant that some places don't want to be reduced to data points. Some spaces don't exist to be mapped, only experienced, and even then, only briefly. And I think I was allowed back because I understood, too late, that I wasn't entitled to explanations. So here's what I've learned, and this is the part one want to be clear about. First, not every environment is passive. Some places respond to attention. Not dramatically, not violently, but deliberately. Second, losing time doesn't always mean losing consciousness. Sometimes it means being present in a way your memory can't fully process. Third, and this is the one that stays with me, curiosity is not the same as permission. Just because you're allowed to enter a place doesn't mean you're meant to understand it. I don't think the mangroves were trying to hurt me. I think they were reminding me that observation goes both ways. I still write things down. But now, when I'm in the field, I pause sometimes before the first note. I pay attention to how the place feels before I start trying to define it. Because once, in Leyte, I learned what it feels like to be briefly misfiled by the world. And I'm not entirely sure I came back unchanged. If you're hearing this on Calyx Reads, then thank you for listening all the way through. Some stories don't want an audience, but this one needed a witness. That's all. Gretchen. Stories like this don't always end with answers. Sometimes, they end with a question that follows someone for the rest of their life. Whether what Gretchen experienced was psychological, environmental, or something else entirely is up to you to decide. What's certain is that some places don't reveal themselves all at once, and some moments leave marks that don't fade with time. If you've ever felt like a place noticed you back, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you on my next video.